Okay, welcome to the Chapter 5 study guide video. So in this video I'm going to go over all of the answers on your study guide packet. I'm not really going to explain it too much. I'm just really going to do the problems for you so you can take a look at what you might have done wrong if you did get one of these wrong. But if you're still struggling with the concept, then I suggest that you review the other videos that I've made for you that are specific to each module. I want to reiterate that I want you to solve these on your own. I want you to try to solve these on your own first before you watch this video, right? Because that's the best indicator as to whether you're ready for this test or not. So please try to solve these problems on your own before watching this video. All right, now that I've already taken a minute of your time, let's go ahead and go to the first one. So 2x plus 3y equals 8. We are to determine if this is a linear function or a linear equation, and yes, it would be linear. No exponents, and it's actually written in standard form. So remember, standard form is ax plus by equals c, and that's exactly what this is written in. So module 1, we kind of did these type of equations using a table, but we could also use intercepts, and that's what I'm going to do for this problem. I'll just find my x and y intercept and use those intercepts to graph this linear equation. So my x-intercept and my y-intercept. So remember, for x-intercept we're going to want to set y to be 0, so that would be 2x plus 3 times 0 equals 8, right? And 3 times 0 is just 0, so it would be 2x equals 8. We divide by 2 on both sides, and we get x equals 4. So our y-intercept is 4, 0. I'm sorry, our x-intercept is 4, 0. For y-intercept, we would set x to be 0, right? So if x is 0, that would be 2 times 0 plus 3y equals 8, and that would be 3y is equal to 8. And if we divide by 3 on both sides, that would give us y is equal to 8 over 3. So our ordered pair would be 0, comma, and that would be 2 2/3. So if we're plotting this on our number line, not our number line, on our coordinate plane, our first ordered pair, our x-intercept would be 4, 0, which would be right over here, 4, 0. So we would go ahead and put the point right at 4, 0. And then our y-intercept would be at 0, and then 2 2/3. So 2 2/3 would be about here, right? And that's it. That wasn't even close. Let's try that again. A little better. Not the straightest line, I'm sorry. But that's it. That's your... And you could have also used the table, and that's what we did the first module. If it's easier for you to make a table, go ahead. Now, some problems they're going to specifically ask you to find the x and y intercept, though. So we only have to graph it if it's a linear function, and this is not going to be a linear function. Why? Exponent. Okay, so an exponent is greater than 1. So this is not linear, so we would not have to graph it. Write the general equation for the standard form of a linear equation, and you need to know this: ax plus by equals c. That's standard form. Ax plus by equals c. The number of touchdowns scored for each quarter of a game. So we're to state whether this is discrete or continuous. So remember, if it's discrete, that means our graph would look like this. Just dots. Okay, we normally have discrete when we're talking about real world situations where we can't break something up into fractions or parts or decimals. Okay, and whereas continuous would look like this. So that would be a real world type example where we can break something up into fractions or pieces or decimals. So over here, if it says the number of touchdowns scored for each quarter of a game, can you score half of a touchdown? Can you score a tenth of a touchdown? No, you can't. So this is going to be a discrete graph. Next we have y equals 35x, where x is distance and y is height. So distance and height can be broken up into tenths and fractions and decimals, and so this is going to be a continuous graph. So continuous. Please review that video 5.1, module 5.1 if you're still struggling with identifying continuous and discrete functions. Graph each function and give its domain and range. So this is a linear function, and this isn't a real world problem, so we don't even have to think about reasonableness, right? So the domain is obviously going to be all reals, and the range is going to be all reals, and we know that off the bat because, again, we're not dealing with a real world problem where we'll have to talk about reasonableness, and they're not constraining us with a given domain. They're just giving us this linear equation, right? And if you don't understand why both of those are all real, review that video 5.1, module 5.1. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and create a table to kind of figure out some points that I could use, and I'll get 3 points, and I'll use -2, 0, and 2. So if we plug in -2, well, it would be y equals 1/2 times -2, which is -1 minus 3. And -1 minus 3 is -4. So at -2, y would be -4. If we plug in 0, then that would just be y equals 1/2 times 0 minus 3, which would be -3. So at 0, and f of 0, y is -3. And if we plug in 2, it would be y equals 1/2 times 2 minus 3, which is 1/2 times 2 is 1, so it would be y equals 1 minus 3, which is -2. So at 2, it would be -2. And we go ahead and put these points on our graph here. -2, -4 would be right here. 0, -3 would be right here. And 2, -2 would be right here. And it's continuous. And you could tell just by looking at the line that the domain is going to be all real and the range is going to be all real. Steve opens a jewelry shop and makes $15 profit for each piece of jewelry sold. The amount Steve makes is given by the function f of x equals 15x, where x is the number of pieces of jewelry sold. So x is the number of pieces of jewelry sold. So here is a real world type problem where we have to think of reasonable domains, right? So would it make sense for him to sell a negative amount of jewelry? No. Would it make sense for him to sell absolutely no pieces of jewelry? Sure, that would make sense. It would stink for Steve, but that would make sense. Would it make sense for him to sell a piece of jewelry? Would it make sense for him to sell half of a diamond? No, that wouldn't make sense. So obviously we're dealing with whole pieces here. So our domain is going to be all the whole numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, etc., etc., etc. Right? Now to find our range, we could just create a table. So at 0, if we plug in 0 into our function, which is, let me change this, which is f of x equals 15, which f of x, you could just think of that as y, equals 15. So f of 0 would be, f of x equals 15x. F of 0 would be 15 times 0, right? Which would be 0. If we plug in 1, it would be f of 1, which is 15 times 1, which is 15. Plug in 2, f of 2 would be 15 times 2, which is 30. Plug in 3, f of 3 would be 15 times 3, which is 45. Okay, then we graph it on a coordinate plane, so 0, 0, 1, 15, 2, 30, 3, 45, 4 would be 60, 5 would be 75, and then this is going to just be a discrete graph, right? We're not going to connect it with the line because we can't sell those a fraction of a piece of jewelry. So we're going to leave this as just a discrete line with just dots. We're not going to connect it with a line. So what would your range be? Because it's asking for domain and range. Your range would be 0, 15, 30, 45, etc., etc., etc. find the x and y intercept. So x-intercept would mean that y would have to equal 0. So that would be 2x minus 3 times 0 equals negative 6, which is 2x equals negative 6. And if we divide both sides by 2, we get x is equal to negative 3. So our x-intercept would be negative 3 comma 0. Our y-intercept, with y-intercept, x has to be 0, so it would be 2 times 0 minus 3y equals negative 6, which would be negative 3y equals negative 6. If we divide both sides by negative 3, we get y equals positive 2. So our y-intercept would be 0 comma 2. Number 9, again, x for x-intercept, your y has to be 0, so it would be 3/5 x plus 1/2 times 0 equals 30. So that would obviously be 0, so we have 3/5 x equals 30. And if we divide both sides by 3/5, we would get x equals 50. So our x-intercept would be 50 comma 0. And then our y-intercept would be x would have to be 0, so it would be 3/5 times 0 plus 1/2 y equals 30. 3/5 times 0, this is supposed to be a plus sign, plus 1/2 y equals 30, so that would just be 1/2 y equals 30. And if we divide both sides by 1/2, we get y equals 60. So our y-intercept would be 0 comma 60. Okay, the air temperature is negative 6 degrees Celsius at sunrise and rises 3 degrees Celsius every hour for several hours. So hopefully you know how to write an equation just given that information, right? But they actually give you the equation, though. They give you the function, which is f of x equals 3x minus 6. Right off the bat, hopefully you can identify that this right here is going to be our y-intercept. But if you couldn't, then just use the function they give you. Just use this equation. Remember, f of x means y, so if it helps you to just change that to y, go ahead and do that. It's y equals 3x minus 6. And if you're looking for the x-intercept, what's going to have to be 0? Y would have to be 0, so that would be 0 equals 3x minus 6. If we add 6 on both sides, we get 6 equals 3x. And if we divide by 3 on both sides, we get x equals 2. So our x-intercept is going to be 2, 0. Okay, our x-intercept is at 2. Now, our y-intercept, we would have to set x to be 0, right? So it's going to be y equals 3 times 0 minus 6. So our y-intercept is going to be at negative 6 degrees, or 0 comma negative 6. And it's asking us to interpret this as well. So how would we interpret this? Well, what does our y-intercept mean? Our y-intercept, if we look at the problem, what does our domain stand for? Our domain stands for time. So right when we began, which would represent what? Sunrise, what was the temperature? It was negative 6 degrees Celsius. So what does the y-intercept represent? It represents the temperature at sunrise when we began, which was negative 6 degrees. Okay. Now, what does this mean? Well, 2, again, stands for hours, right? So this stands for 2 hours. And what's happening after 2 hours? Well, after 2 hours, the temperature is finally going to reach 0 degrees Celsius. So the x-intercept just means that it takes 2 hours for the temperature to reach 0 degrees Celsius. I don't have space to write this, but you're going to have to write it on your test because it specifically says to interpret the x and y-intercept. So make sure you do that on your test tomorrow. If not, you're going to get points taken off. Now, if we were to graph this, our y-intercept was negative 6 or 0 negative 6. I'm sorry, which is right here, and our x-intercept was 2 0, which is right here, and it will be continuous because it's time, right? And that's it. That's all you would have to do. The number of brake pads needed for a car is 4, and a manufacturing plant has 480 brake pads. Number of brake pads remaining after brake pads have been installed on X cars is f of x equals 480 minus 4x. So again, if it helps, just think of f of x as y and just find your x and y intercept. So y equals 480 minus 4x. Your x-intercept, you'd have to set your y to be 0, so it would be 0 equals 480 minus 4x, which would be 480 equals negative 4x. And if we divide both sides by 4, we get our x-intercept is 120. So that would be 120 comma 0. Y-intercept, we'd have to set x to be 0. So it would be y equals 480 minus 4 times 0. So that's just going to be y equals 480. So our y-intercept is 0, 480. But it's not enough for you to just write the intercepts. You also need to tell me what they mean. So what does the y-intercept stand for? Well, look at what our domain was talking about. Our domain was talking about number of cars, and our range was the brake pads, right? And if you read the problem, that also mentioned it in the problem. So what does 480 stand for? This stands for the initial amount of brake pads that we had before we started installing them in cars. 480, that represents the number of brake pads that we had before they were installed. What does the x-intercept stand for? Well, here y is 0, so we have no brake pads remaining, right? And we've installed them on 120 cars. So what does that mean? That means it would take 120 cars to run out of brake pads. Okay, after we do 120 cars, we're done. We don't have any more brake pads. So we're going to have to go ahead and graph this with our intercepts. So our first intercept is 120. I'm sorry, yeah, 120 comma 0, that's our x-intercept. I should have started with the y-intercept though. Our y-intercept would be 480, I'm sorry, 0 comma 480, which would be somewhere around here. And that would be it. That's all you would have to do. Number 12, use intercepts and just graph the line using those intercepts. So for x-intercept, we know that we're going to have to set y to be 0. So x-intercept is going to be negative 6 times 0 equals negative 4x plus 24, which is 0 equals negative 4x plus 24. If we subtract 24 on both sides, we get negative 24 equals negative 4x. And if we divide by negative 4 on both sides, we get x equals 6. So our x-intercept is 6 comma 0. What's our y-intercept? Well, what do we have to set to 0 for our y-intercept? Our x. So it would be negative 6y equals negative 4 times 0 plus 24, which would be negative 6y equals 24. And if we divide both sides by negative 6, we get y equals negative 4. So our y-intercept is 0 comma negative 4. And then we're just going to put this on the coordinate plane. So our x-intercept is 6, 0, which is right here. And our y-intercept is 0, negative 4, which is right here. And that would be your line. So again, x-intercept and y-intercept. For x-intercept, we're going to want to set y to be 0. So that would be 2/3 times 0 equals 2 minus 1/2 x. Okay, so that would just be 0 equals 2 minus 1/2 x. We subtract 2 on both sides. We get negative 2 equals negative 1/2 x. And then we divide both sides by negative 1/2. And we would get 4 equals x. So our x-intercept is 4 comma 0. Our y-intercept, I forgot what it's up there. All right, so our y-intercept, we'd have to set x to be 0. So it would be 2/3 times y equals 2 minus 1/2 times 0. And that would just be 2/3 times y equals 2. And then we would have to divide by 2/3. And if we do that, we get y equals 3. So our y-intercept is going to be 0 comma 3. And we're going to use this to go ahead and create a line on our coordinate plane. So let's go back to our coordinate plane. It was 4, 0, and 0, 3. So 4, 0, and 0, 3. And that's your line. Alright, this video is already really long, so I'll try to speed things up a bit. So remember, slope would be change in y over change in x, or rise over run. Okay, so for change in y, well, what's going on over here? It looks like we are going up 9, right? Positive 9, so the change in y would be 9 over, and what's our run? looks like it's 3. We're going over 3 spaces on the x-axis, so it would be 9 over 3. But we want this in simplest form, so our slope is going to be, well, 9 divided by 3 is 3. Positive slope, and hopefully you were able to tell that it was positive just even before looking at or even before solving this, just by looking at the graph. And if you're still confused by that, watch the video that I made on module 5.3. So hopefully just by looking at this, you could tell that it's going to be a negative slope. So if we start with this point right here, which again, it doesn't really matter which point you start with, but if we start with this point right here, it looks like, well, what's going on? We're going down 8 spaces, right? So remember, a slope is going to be rise over run, change in y over change in x. So your change in y is going to go on the top on the numerator, so it's going to be -8. We're going down 8 spaces, and what's going on the x-axis? It looks like we're going over 2 spaces, so it would be -8 over 2. And if we simplify that, we get our slope, which is -4. So right here, we don't really have to do much. We obviously know that it's a vertical line, and vertical line is going to mean that this is undefined. So undefined. Horizontal line, automatically we're going to know that that is a 0 slope. So m is going to equal 0. Remember the slope formula, which is m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. All right, so it doesn't matter which point you choose to be your first one. All right, so that's going to be 6 minus 6 over 8 minus -5, which is going to be 0, right, over 13. And 0 divided by 13 is just 0, so the slope is going to be 0. And here again, it doesn't matter which one you choose to be, x1, y1, you get the same thing. So it'll be -2 minus -7 over 2 minus 12, which would be 5 over -10, or -5/10. And we could simplify that, and that would be -1/2 would be your slope. Okay, so you could either just do your rise over run with your graph, or you could use the slope formula. I'm going to go ahead and use the slope formula. So m is going to equal 170 minus 110 over 8 minus 4. So m is going to equal 60 over 4. And if I divide that, I'll find my slope, which is m equals 15. All right, and interpret this. Hopefully you know how to do that. This video is already really long, so I won't do that, but we could talk about that tomorrow if you need help with that. And last problem, again, I'm just going to find the slope here. I am not going to interpret it, just because we're running out of time and I'm trying to do this quickly. So slope y2 minus y1, so it's going to be 460. Oops. 400m equals 460 minus 310, and that's going to be over 3,500 minus 1,000, x2 minus x1, which is going to be 150 over 2,500, which that would be 3/50. That would be your slope. Okay. And you'd have to interpret this as well. So that's it. I'm sorry that this video was so long. Make sure you interpret number 20 and 21 as well on your tests. And that's it for your video. I will see you tomorrow. If you need any additional help with this, come to tutoring or watch the other videos. Have a great day.